We're going to turn now to the ABC News exclusive tonight after Donald Trump was fined nearly $355 million in his civil fraud case. Tonight, New York State's Attorney General Letitia James saying she's prepared to seize Donald Trump's assets, including his buildings, if he doesn't pay the money. ABC's Aaron Katersky one-on-one tonight with the Attorney General.
4 days after a judge ordered Donald Trump to pay $355 million for a decade of fraud, New York Attorney General Letitia James says she's prepared to do everything she can to make sure the former president pays his fine, including, she told us, seizing the buildings that bear his name.
If he does not have funds to pay off the judgment, then we will seek, judgment enforcement mechanisms in court, and we will ask the judge to seize his assets.
Hey, Adam coming through. So what just happened? The sun hasn't even risen over Manhattan when the first black SUVs pull up to the curb on Fifth Avenue. Men in dark suits with badges clipped to their belts step out and take positions at every entrance. They're not here for a press conference. They're not here for a photo op. They're here because a court order gives them the legal authority to take control of one of the most famous buildings in the world. And inside that building, behind those gold letters that spell out his name in 20-foot-tall capitals, the man who built it all is nowhere to be found.
We're back now with the race for the White House and former President Donald Trump's legal troubles.
New York's Attorney General says she's ready to seize Trump's assets if he doesn't pay the massive fine in his civil fraud case.
In an ABC News exclusive, New York Attorney General Letitia James says she's prepared to do whatever it takes for former President Trump to pay the $355 million he owes for a decade of fraud.
We are prepared to make sure that the judgment is paid to New Yorkers.
James brought the civil fraud trial against Trump, his organization, and his two eldest sons. A judge finding he was liable for exaggerating his wealth and inflating the value of his real estate so banks would give him low-interest loans. Trump insisted the banks liked doing business with him. ABC's Aaron Katersky questioning the Attorney General.
They said no victim, no one got harmed, the banks got paid back. So no harm, no foul. Why is that not the case?
He engaged in this massive amount of fraud, and it wasn't just a simple mistake, a slight oversight. The variations were wildly exaggerated.
This is not a movie trailer. This is not a dramatization. This is the enforcement mechanism of a $450 million fraud judgment that New York Attorney General Letitia James has been preparing for months. And the properties on the list read like a tour of Donald Trump's greatest hits. Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue, the gleaming skyscraper where he launched his presidential campaign.
Trump said the penalty against him would drive other businesses out of New York.
We'll appeal, we'll be successful, I think, because, frankly, if we're not successful, New York State is gone.
But the state's attorney general told us she's not worried.
And last I checked, tourism is up, and Wall Street is doing just fine.
Even with an impending appeal, Trump must either put all $355 million in escrow at the court or post a portion of it as a bond with interest. And David, tonight the Attorney General is telling us she is determined to make Trump pay, even if it means seizing this building or others long in the Trump portfolio.
40 Wall Street, the towering landmark in the heart of the financial district. 7 Springs, the sprawling Westchester estate where he escaped the chaos of the city. And every bank account, every revenue stream, every dollar flowing through the Trump organization is now within reach of the state's enforcement authority. Let me paint you a picture of exactly how we got here, because the road to federal marshals surrounding Trump's properties was paved with court orders, legal filings, and a fraud finding so extensive that the judge who issued it compared it to the worst corporate misconduct he had ever seen. Judge Arthur Engoron didn't just rule against Trump. He documented years of inflated valuations, fraudulent financial statements, and systematic deception of banks and insurers. And when he added up the damages, he didn't come up with a slap on the wrist. He came up with a number that represents the financial benefit Trump obtained through years of lying about what his properties were worth: $450 million. That's the judgment. That's what Trump owes the state of New York. And that's what Letitia James has vowed to collect, one building at a time if necessary. Now here's where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Trump's lawyers went to more than 30 surety companies trying to post a bond for the full amount. 30 companies, 30 professional firms whose entire business model is evaluating whether people can pay their debts, and every single one of them said no. They looked at Trump's financial statements. They assessed the actual market value of his properties, not the inflated numbers he'd been using for years. They calculated his existing debt load. They estimated his liquid assets, and they came to the same conclusion. There wasn't enough equity. There wasn't enough cash. There wasn't enough unencumbered value in the Trump portfolio to secure a bond of that size. 30 companies, 30 independent professional assessments, and every single one of them delivered the same verdict. The financial industry does not believe Donald Trump is worth what he claims. An appeals court eventually stepped in and allowed Trump to post a reduced bond of $175 million, which temporarily paused the enforcement process while his appeal proceeds. But that bond didn't make the judgment disappear. It didn't reduce the amount he ultimately owes. And it didn't change the fundamental reality that if Trump loses that appeal, the full $450 million comes roaring back, and every enforcement mechanism Letitia James has prepared activates immediately. And Letitia James has been anything but subtle about what those mechanisms look like. She sat in front of cameras and told the entire country that she will seize Trump's property if he doesn't pay. She pointed out that her office is located directly across the street from one of his buildings. She wasn't making a political threat. She was describing a legal process that New York law gives her both the authority and the obligation to carry out. And the steps in that process are spelled out in black and white in the state's civil enforcement statutes. Let me walk you through exactly how this works, because the image of federal marshals surrounding Trump Tower didn't come out of nowhere. It's based on a real legal escalation that has been used against judgment debtors across New York for decades. The first step is filing the judgment in the counties where Trump owns property. James has already done that in New York County and Westchester County, the jurisdictions where Trump Tower, 40 Wall Street, and 7 Springs are located. Those filings create automatic liens on every piece of real estate Trump owns in those jurisdictions. A lien means the property cannot be sold, transferred, or refinanced without first satisfying the judgment. It's like putting a padlock on the deed that only the state has the key to. The second step is freezing bank accounts and garnishing cash. Under New York law, once a judgment is entered, the state can serve freezing orders on every financial institution that does business with the Trump organization. When a bank receives one of those orders, they don't call Trump's lawyers to discuss it. They freeze the accounts immediately. Every dollar in every Trump organization account, every rental deposit from tenants in Trump Tower, every lease payment from office space at 40 Wall Street, every dollar flowing through the business becomes inaccessible until the court says otherwise. And for a real estate business that runs on cash flow, an account freeze is catastrophic. The mortgages still need to be paid, the insurance premiums still come due, the property taxes don't pause, the maintenance crews still expect their paychecks, but the money to cover all of that is suddenly locked away behind a court order. The third step, if the account freezes and garnishments aren't sufficient to satisfy the judgment, is asking the court to appoint receivers to take operational control of individual properties. A receiver is a court-appointed manager who takes over the day-to-day operations of a building. They collect the rents, they pay the bills, they hire and fire staff, they make all operational decisions. And they answer not to Trump, but to the judge who appointed them. Once a receiver is in place, Trump's name might still be on the building, but the building belongs to the court. And here's where the Marshals enter the picture. To effectuate the transition of control from Trump's organization to a court-appointed receiver, the court can authorize enforcement officers, including sheriffs and federal marshals, to accompany the receiver to the property and ensure the transfer occurs without interference. That's not a raid, it's not a SWAT operation, it's civil enforcement. But it does involve law enforcement officers physically present at Trump's buildings to make sure the court's orders are carried out. And if Trump or his employees refuse to cooperate, if they try to prevent the receiver from entering or accessing management systems, those enforcement officers are authorized to remove obstacles by force if necessary. Now, let's talk about what this means for the specific properties on the list, because each one represents a different kind of target. Trump Tower isn't just an office building, it's Trump's home. It's the place where he announced his candidacy for president. It's the building whose lobby became one of the most recognized spaces in American politics. His name in gold letters visible from blocks away is the first thing you see when you approach it. And the idea that a court-appointed receiver could take operational control of that building, that the rents Trump depends on could flow to a court account instead of his, that decisions about the building's future could be made by someone who answers to a judge rather than to Trump, that idea is not just a financial threat, it's an existential one. For a man whose entire identity is built on the image of a successful, powerful, wealthy real estate mogul, losing control of Trump Tower would be the ultimate humiliation. It would be visible, tangible, undeniable proof that the empire he spent a lifetime building has been taken from him by the legal system he spent a lifetime trying to manipulate. And the same is true of 40 Wall Street and 7 Springs and every other property that carries his name and reflects his image. Each one is a symbol, and each one is a target. The timeline for all of this depends entirely on the appeal. As long as Trump's appeal is pending and the reduced bond is in place, enforcement is paused. The bond acts as a guarantee that the money will be available if Trump loses. And as long as that guarantee is in effect, the state cannot move on his assets. But appeals don't last forever. The appellate court will issue a ruling, and that ruling will go one of 3 ways. It could uphold the judgment entirely, in which case the full $450 million comes due and enforcement resumes immediately. It could modify the judgment, reducing the amount or changing some terms, in which case a modified enforcement process begins. Or it could reverse the judgment entirely, which, given how thoroughly Engoron documented the fraud, is considered extremely unlikely by virtually every legal analyst who has reviewed the case. The most likely outcome, according to the legal consensus, is that the judgment is upheld in whole or in substantial part. And when that happens, the pause ends, the bond is called, and if Trump cannot come up with the full amount, which 30 surety companies already indicated he could not, then every enforcement mechanism James prepared kicks into gear. Account freezes, cash garnishments, lien enforcement, receiver appointments, and yes, enforcement officers at the properties to ensure the court's orders are carried out. Now let's break down why this matters beyond just the financial penalties. First, the 30 surety companies refusing to bond the full judgment is the financial industry's verdict on Trump's actual net worth. These are companies that make money by evaluating risk and issuing bonds. They have no political agenda. They have no interest in whether Trump wins or loses an election. Their only interest is whether the collateral exists to cover the bond if Trump defaults. And 30 of them, one after another, looked at Trump's financial position and said the collateral isn't there. That professional assessment from 30 independent firms tells you that Trump's ability to satisfy the judgment is limited. He managed to post the reduced $175 million bond, which is significantly less than the full amount. But if the appeal fails and the full judgment is reinstated, he'll need to come up with the remaining amount. And 30 companies already said the assets to cover it don't exist. Second, the enforcement process is designed to be progressive and escalating. It doesn't start with the most extreme measure and work backward. It starts with the least intrusive options, liens, account freezes, garnishments, and escalates based on the defendant's response. If Trump pays, the process stops. If he posts a bond, it pauses. But if he does neither, if he cannot pay and cannot bond, the process moves to the next level, and each level is more intrusive, more visible, and more damaging than the last. Liens are invisible to the public. Account freezes are known only to the banks and the parties involved. But receiver appointments and property seizures are public. They generate headlines. They produce images of enforcement officers at Trump's buildings. And each escalation makes the next one easier. Because once a court has authorized account freezes and the defendant still hasn't paid, the argument for receiver appointments becomes stronger. And once receivers are in place and the defendant still hasn't paid, the argument for property sales becomes nearly automatic. Third, the potential seizure of Trump Tower would be the single most symbolically devastating event of Trump's entire public life. Every president has a defining image, a photograph, or a moment that captures the essence of their legacy. And if Trump Tower ends up under the control of a court-appointed receiver, if the gold letters come down or the building's revenue flows to the state instead of to Trump, that image will define Trump's legacy more than any rally, any speech, or any political victory, because Trump Tower is not just a building, it's the symbol of everything Trump claims to be: wealthy, powerful, successful, a winner. And losing control of that symbol, losing it not to a competitor or a market downturn but to a court judgment for fraud, would be the most visible, most tangible, most impossible to spin proof that the empire was built on lies. You cannot stand in front of a building that a court has taken from you and claim to be a successful businessman. You cannot point to a skyscraper managed by a court-appointed receiver and tell voters you're going to fix the economy. The symbolism is inescapable. Fourth, the enforcement process against Trump's properties is not a future hypothetical. It's a present reality that is already affecting the value of his empire, the behavior of his business partners, and his ability to operate as a functioning real estate company. Right now, every bank that holds a mortgage on a Trump property knows about the $450 million judgment. Every insurance company that covers a Trump building has recalculated the risk profile. Every major tenant in Trump Tower, or 40 Wall Street, is evaluating whether to renew their lease in a building that could be under court control within a year. Every potential business partner considering a deal with the Trump organization is factoring the judgment into their assessment. The enforcement hasn't physically begun, but its effects are already being felt through the financial ecosystem that surrounds Trump's properties. Lenders tighten terms, insurers raise premiums, tenants hesitate, partners pull back. And the cumulative effect of all those decisions, made by rational actors responding to a real legal risk, is a slow erosion of the value and viability of Trump's real estate portfolio. The buildings are still standing, the gold letters are still up, but underneath the surface, in the financial infrastructure that keeps the empire running, the foundation is cracking. And every day the judgment remains in place, every day the appeal drags on. Every day the enforcement possibility hangs over the properties. Those cracks get wider. The Marshals don't need to show up for the damage to accumulate. The judgment itself is doing the work quietly, steadily, relentlessly. So let's be clear about what's actually happening. Letitia James has publicly vowed to seize Trump's property if he does not satisfy the $450 million fraud judgment. She has already filed judgments in New York City and Westchester County, the jurisdictions where Trump Tower, 40 Wall Street, and 7 Springs are located. Under New York law, once the appeal concludes and if the judgment is upheld, she can freeze his bank accounts, garnish his cash, intercept his rental income, appoint receivers to take operational control of his buildings, and enlist enforcement officers to ensure the court's orders are carried out. 30 surety companies refuse to bond the full judgment, telling the financial world that Trump cannot cover it. The reduced bond of $175 million has paused the process temporarily, but if the appeal fails, the full amount comes due, and every enforcement mechanism James prepared activates immediately. The properties that carry Trump's name, the buildings he has pointed to his entire life as proof of his success, are one appellate ruling away from becoming targets of a court-ordered collection process that Trump has no power to stop. The enforcement machinery is built, the legal groundwork is laid, the liens are filed, the Attorney General is ready. And the man whose name is on the buildings, the man who went silent as the enforcement preparations were made public, is sitting in the Oval Office watching the clock tick on an appeal that will determine whether the most famous real estate portfolio in America remains his or becomes the property of a court-appointed receiver executing a fraud judgment. The Marshals haven't shown up yet. The buildings are still in Trump's hands, but every day brings that moment closer. Every ruling from the appellate court narrows the options. Every passing week without a payment tightens the vice. And when the appeal is finally decided, when the court issues its ruling and the pause ends, everything James has prepared moves from standby to active. The accounts freeze, the garnishments begin, the receivers are appointed, and the gold letters on the buildings that bear Trump's name start to mean something very different than what they used to. Not success, not power, not wealth, but the price of fraud, collected by the state, one property at a time.